Ingenious, really tall, and on track to bring the steam back to our interest in trains.
Give it up for Ryan Lobner.
Ooh, fancy clickers. Hello, everyone. Ryan's the name and trains is my game. So, I'm going to introduce us with a question today. When you think of havoc and harmony, what comes to mind? Ooh. Is it the old Chinese philosophy of yin and yang? Maybe it's Newton's third law of motion. No, how does that Hamilton quote go? For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. Or perhaps it's the idea of peace after war. Now, no matter which way you slice it, we all have a different perception or perspective of this quite abstract concept. And believe it or not, for me, when I think of havoc and harmony, I think of 1970s American railroading. You know, it's a little weird, right? Going from something so abstract to something so specific in the blink of an eye. Well, on the surface it appears that these two topics are, well, polar opposites. They're more alike than they may seem. So please, sit back, relax, and enjoy as I turn the clocks back roughly 70 years ago. Now, the 1950s was the last golden decade of railroading in the United States. Big railroad terminals were filled to the brim with the fastest, fanciest, and most fabulous passenger trains. There were names such as the 20th Century Limited, the Super Chief, the Powhatan Arrow were household. And you're not going to believe this, they actually turned a profit. Trains ran with the best equipment, dome cars, taverns, lounges, parlors, you name it, they had it. On the freight side, railroads were putting older and more unreliable steam locomotives out to pasture and bringing in new, sleek diesel-electric locomotives to haul tomorrow's freight today. Well, that's what some would say. You know, catchy advertising and all that, it's important. Now, innovative visions such as welded rail, rail that was joined via welding instead of antique rail joiners, became a reality, and that allowed trains to travel at higher speeds without the risk of derailing. Now, the competition was scarce, and that was exactly what they were hoping for, they being the railroads. However, because this is a TED Talk and you need some conflict in there, two major factors would soon change the playing field forever. In 1957, Boeing introduced their 707 aircraft, and you could say it really took off. It took airlines' passenger numbers sky high, if you know what I mean. It opened up flying to the middle class and took away many of the railroad's passengers. A market it had dominated for, well, let me do the calculations here, a long time, 60 years to be exact. Now, while rail travel transformed transcontinental travel from a matter of months to a matter of days, air travel transformed it from a matter of days to a matter of hours. The thrill of racing across the country in just days had been made obsolete by one newfangled flying machine. Great. Now, you're probably thinking, well, at least freight is still rolling, right? Well, let me tell you something. Freight was rolling, but on the paved roads of the highway. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, Ryan, cars, trucks, buses, these things have existed long before the 1950s. Why are they a problem now? And to that I respond with the Highway Act of 1956, which bolstered highways on an unimaginable scale. So there was this new thing. I don't know if you heard of it. It was called using trucks other than in small towns. Suddenly, shippers found it more attractive to send their cargo for half the cost. Now, unlike railroads, longer distance trucking was new and essentially unregulated. Truckers and trucking companies were able to set their own rates. That was unlike the railroads, which had their own rates determined by the ICC, better known as the Interstate Commerce Commission. You're going to want to keep them in mind. They're important later. Now, a result of all of the new kids on the block was the largest bankruptcy in American history of the time. Let's backtrack here because you're probably thinking, how did we get here? The cast of characters for this historic and perhaps infamous event was the Pennsylvania Railroad, also known as the Pennsy, the New York Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad's biggest rival, Also remember this fact, it'll be important later, and the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad, better known as the New Haven. They're a little inconsequential to the story, I'm sorry, New Haven fans, but you have your time somewhere else. Now, all three of these railroads were in, how would I elegantly put this, awful shape. These railroads were struggling. You see, the New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad had invested in a future where their railroad service would remain basically unchallenged. So when planes, trucks, buses came along, they weren't prepared for when people just stopped riding, and by extension, shipping. Now, as I was saying, the ICC mandated passenger operations, so railroad just couldn't cut them. That would be to make fall with the shortfall of freight. As you can see on the slide here, that's a New York Central train hauling one coach. Imagine what a ride that would be. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, he's covered the New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad. What about the New Haven Railroad that nobody cares about? They've been struggling since the 50s, believe me. So, everyone's practically in the same boat here. Nothing was making money. Now, any sane person would realize that merging these three railroads together would cause an absolute train wreck. And many people did. In fact, Alfred Perlman, the gentleman with the red arrow pointing to him, knew that. He was one of the head honchos at the New York Central. In fact, the head honcho. You could say that he was the head honcho. Now, he knew that merging was the way to survive in this brave new world, but merging with the Pennsylvania and later the New Haven would end catastrophically. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Ryan, why would that end badly? Because despite their names, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central basically ran to the same places. So merging them would do no good. Seeing how merging is to consolidate and remove any unprofitable lines. As you can see, they practically go everywhere, folks. Now, also remember, they were rivals. Remember this. It'll be important later, I promise. So, Alfred Perlman tried talking to other railroads to merge, more specifically the Baltimore in Ohio and the Chesapeake in Ohio, but they were kind of preoccupied with themselves. So, seeing that there was no other options, he reopened merger talks with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and on February 1st, 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, and later the New Haven, ceased to exist, and Penn Central came into power. So, the problems with Penn Central started on day one. No, literally, it started on day one, folks. Here's the scoop. As I said, the two railroads, they ran to the same places, just over different routes. And like the different routes, the two companies' operating cultures were muy diferente, or very different. Now, the Pennsylvania Railroad, as you can see on the left, I think on the left, ran things in a very military-like fashion. Again, they had proper titles, they had near impossible promotions. You kind of had to know someone to get promoted. It was a little corrupt, I know. The New York Central, I guess the one on the black for you, was very different. You see, addressing people by the first name was the norm. Their promotions were based on performance instead of knowing some guy. And the other two things that set the railroads apart was their outlooks on technology. The Pennsylvania Railroad still kept passenger trains around way after they were, kind of done for. And remember, all these trains were basically hauling air. So, the railroad was very slow to adapt computers. The Central, on the other hand, took the fast track and cut passenger services where they could and were quick to adapt computers. Well, now, Now, imagine merging these two companies at an indescribable pace. It was, in fact, through this half-baked merger that two factions in Penn Central's higher management arose. There were the Green Hats, and there were the Red Hats. The Green Hats were from the New York Central. As you can see, they painted their boxcars green, hence green. And the Red Hats were from the Pennsylvania. As you can see, because they painted their boxcars red. Now, things were bad. Things were really bad. Pretty bad, awfully bad, super bad. You see, due to the quickness, the computers, which are the lifeblood of a railroad, were rapidly merged together. leading to them being unable to talk to each other. It was through this complete confusion that caused cars to go to the wrong places and car clerks to get very confused. Heck, it was through this confusion that led most of Maine's potato harvest, something that it was known for apparently. Who knew that Maine was known for potatoes? To rot in Selkirk Yard, simply because they couldn't put it on any train to take it out. The railroad also had to deal with a ballooning payroll. Now, this was due to the sheer amount of workers. Money wasn't being put into the tracks, which led to deferred track maintenance. It was so bad that on some parts of the line, trains had to crawl along at 5 to 10 miles an hour. It was reported that on one month, Penn Central had over 600 derailments. That's roughly 20 a day. 13% of their freight car fleet was inoperable, and the cars that were running had shoddy repair jobs. Repair shops were old and rickety, with a few dating back to when steam locomotives ruled the country. Yeah, it was pretty bad, folks. Penn Central was spiraling. It didn't help that they declared bankruptcy in 1970, and it seemed like nothing could save it. And this is where our story gets pretty. It was in fact the same people who got the railroads into this mess, the federal government, due to all the highways and stuff, who decided to get the railroads out of it. You see, with Penn Central bankrupt and a more prominently northeastern roads almost, if not in the same boat, something had to be done. It was through these twilight years of railroading that Conrail was born. Conrail, otherwise known as the Consolidated Railroad Corporation, a nice name, their government, would take control of more than 7 big railroads, class 1s. It was a daring move, considering that the government was footing the bill this time. Now, Conrail was, as we put it today, a shakeup that, despite not making a profit for the first 6 years of operation, imagine how long the bill that would be, it turned what was a dying industry into an industry that many countries envied. It was a true underdog story. Conrail did what Penn Central couldn't. It created a prototype railroad of the future. Now, I'm going to switch tracks a little bit here. I'm going to want to tell you a different story. A story about what was going to be one of the largest, or the largest railroad in the United States. A story about a last-ditch effort to save an ailing industry. A railroad that stretched 40,000 miles, and it connected the far-flung cities of eastern Canada to the coal fields of Pennsylvania, to the urban, bustling cities of Chicago and St. Louis. A railroad that had, believe it or not, $5 billion in assets, over 5,000 locomotives, and a workforce large enough to handle just about anything. Now, this railroad was also responsible for Amtrak and the following improvements, or decline, it really depends on your perspective here, folks, to American passenger rail service that followed. You aren't going to believe me when I say this, but this railroad was also Penn Central. Penn Central's story, if looked at through a different position, or dare I say, perspective, is quite a heroic one. Looking through the perspective of today, it's obvious that it was a noble last stand against the automobile and aviation industry that, well, let's be blunt here, it fell flat. While some could write Penn Central off as a bankruptcy that was doomed from the start, there are others who believe that Penn Central had the potential to do great things. In fact, I'd go as far to say that Penn Central's story symbolizes the duality of havoc and harmony, and how in essence, it all boils down to your perspective of the situation. For, you see, perspective is a train at a station. Your station, to be exact. Now, this train contains stories, anecdotes, facts, generations, and propaganda. Different perspectives equate to different trains, with us, the riders, sometimes changing trains, or just being frequent riders, getting a variety of different ideas. With this, passengers, us, can form ideas and moral grounds to base what is right and what is wrong. And what I found, the most interesting people have a variety of tickets, with the most dangerous holding a rover pass on just one train. Now, in my eyes, it's nice to have a departure board read Destination Unknown, because understanding more and more perspectives helps bring us together. So, alas, I return to the question. When you think of havoc and harmony, what comes to mind? Is it yin and yang, Newton's third law of motion? Or is it peace after war? But I hope that maybe you'll say it's Penn Central, a bankruptcy, or an underdog. You know what? I'm going to leave that one up to you, because there is no real right answer. It all depends on which train you take.